Council for the International Chair of Bioethics, World Medical Association Cooperation Center, where she is also the co-chair of Department of Bioethics and the Holocaust and the faculty member for the Department of Education. Dr. Gallen founded MIMEH in 2015 as a way to transcend the generational, religious, geographical, and professional boundaries in Holocaust education and protect the legacy of those whose lives were changed irrevocably by the horrendous events that took place during the Holocaust. In April 2021, Dr. Gallen organized and directed Medicine and Morality Lessons from the Holocaust and COVID 19, which featured international scholars including Dr. Albert Bourla and the CEO and Director of Pfizer, and Dr. Anthony Fauci, Director and US National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and Chief Medical Advisor to US President Biden, discussing the nexus between medicine, ethics, and Holocaust and how lessons learned from the past have incorporated into the handling of COVID-19. Dr. Gallen worked with University of Kentucky star basketball player Kellen Grandy to launch the College Athletes for Respect and Equality Care, a social justice initiative aimed at educating and empowering the athlete activists to use the platform to promote equality, justice, and tolerance for all the people. She's also a contributing author at the Globe Post. Thank you so much for joining us today, ma'am. I request you all to check your connection as we're going to start the session now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. So that is like the long bio that I typically give people when I need to sound, like very academic and professional. The short version is I am an academic activist. That's what I tell people. And what does that mean? Basically, that means that I want to change the world, right? I want to use academics. I want to use knowledge to make a difference and to help educate the next generation to become active agents of social change. I think that what we really need to learn, what we really need to understand in the classroom is how to apply what we learn to practical context and how to kind of transcend boundaries and to make sure that what we're learning is something that we can take with us outside of the classroom and can really make a difference in the lives of everybody that we meet. So that would be the short version of kind of what it is that I do and what it is that I aim to do. So with that being said, let's see how I do at running this new version of this presentation. So the learning objectives, which hopefully you saw when you signed up for this workshop. At the end of the workshop, participants should be able to explain and apply the concepts of human dignity and human rights, understand the relevance of these concepts in the context of bioethics, and understand the importance of utilizing the Holocaust as the historical framework for exploring the ramifications of placing scientific or societal progress over the promotion of individual welfare and human dignity. So when you're looking at the screen now, you're probably going, all right, human dignity, yes. Human dignity sounds great. That makes sense. Human dignity and human rights, this is something that we need to understand. And why these concepts are relevant when it comes to bioethics, that makes sense too. My guess is you're probably a little iffy on the third learning objective, but sometimes it's really important, and I am by no means consider myself a historian, but sometimes it's really important to understand and to be able to look at examples where the power and privilege of medicine was abused. And I would say not even just the power and privilege of medicine, but the power and privilege that we as human beings have to treat other human beings with respect and dignity. What happens when we abuse that? And what are the implications that that can have? And particularly when you're talking about a group of people that has a great deal of power over vulnerable populations. So, all right, this is what I'm trying today. All right, this is my attempt. I wish we were all together. Maybe next year we'll be able to be together. But since we're not all together, I want to try and make this interactive. So I want you to try this. Hopefully it works, okay? During this presentation, yes, there's going to be some questions. What you can do is you can go to the website is pollev.com/StaceyGallen684. And you can enter in your response to the question, where are you from? So that we can learn a little bit about everybody that's in this workshop. Alternately, if you have your phone in front of you, you can text Stacy Gallen 684 to the number 37607. Once you do that, you join, and then you'll be able to answer some of the questions that we have. Okay, can we have the link here in the chat box? Yes, you can. All right, oev.com/Stacy Gallen 684. Oh, I see that things are working already. This is making me very happy. All right, or text Stacy Gallen 684 to 3. No, I'm not. You guys are my test case here to see if this works. So, oh, this is fantastic. India, New Delhi. Tell me if anyone's having a problem with this. Right. So the other thing is, if you're putting in 2 words, put a dash in between the 2 words. It's kind of cool, right? It's a kind of cool. It's going to create a word cloud, which I just think is interesting. So we'll give it a few minutes. All right, we got in the chat. Yeah, it's cool, right? I know. I'll tell you how to do it another time. It took me, I'm embarrassed to tell you how long it took me, but fortunately I have a 12-year-old. So he was able to help me out a little bit. Right, so now we can see kind of where everybody is from. And I think the more people, I believe the way this works is the more people who type in India, that's why India is bigger. So more people who type in India makes the word bigger. Very cool. Oh, Uganda. That's awesome. All right. It's always nice to see when you have like one different one in here. All right. Are we still going? Are we good? Very cool. So I'm very big on, in general, the idea of transcending boundaries. So I think when we talk about a concept like human dignity or human rights in particular, keep typing in, this is great. We need to understand that we're really talking about humanity and the foundations of humanity. And so as you'll hear me say, when we talk about the Holocaust, I think very often the Holocaust is seen as something that's being a specific part of history, particularly either Jewish history or German history, or even, as we're going to talk about it today, medical history. But really, when we talk about the Holocaust is a part of human history. It's a part of human history, and it is a part of human history, and it's a part of the human present, and it is a part of Kevin Raja, did I pronounce your name properly? You have your hand raised. Oh, okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if anybody has any questions, put it in the chat, because it's a little bit difficult to, like if you raise your hand, it's a little bit difficult to have you unmute it, to ask you to unmute it. So if you have a question, just put it in the chat. So I think what's important to understand is that what we're going to talk about today is really a part of human history, because we're all connected. So as you can see here from this word cloud, we're from different places, but we're really all connected. And that's one of the things that I wanted you to be able to visually see. So good work with this. I'm glad to see that it's working so far. We're going to do this again. Okay, so here's the next question. I have learned something about medical ethics and the Holocaust before today. So again, same thing. You're going to respond by either texting or going to this. Yes, no, not sure. This is responding in real time. So as everybody answers, it's responding in real time. This is so cool. I can't believe I've never used this before. Also, I feel like the poll everywhere people should be paying me I'm like in advertising for them right now. Okay. This is so fun. Oh, which way is it going to go? Which way is it going to go? All right. All right, excellent. Okay. Oh, wait, it keeps changing. It's just like an unnatural level of fun for me to be having watching the screen. I'm just so proud that I was able to figure this out. So, okay, it looks like actually a pretty fair split here in terms of yes or no, which I think is always interesting. So I like when I'm teaching this, I think it's nice that some people kind of have some knowledge about this, some people don't have knowledge about this. I do know that some people here, not naming any names, but Shubham, have actually been part of this lecture with me before. So right off the bat, I can tell you that some of those yeses, I can tell you for a fact, I have interacted with. So, and possibly, you know, might be next to teach this workshop. So, okay, what are we going to talk about? We're going to start with the Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights, right? The UDBHR. So when we talk about the UDBHR, we're starting with Article 3, which is actually the first article that has like any content in it. And the UDBHR starts out by saying human dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms are to be fully respected. So right from the beginning of the UDBHR, it is setting out straight from the get-go that these are very, very important concepts. And then the second part of that article is that the interests and welfare of the individual should have priority over the sole interests of science or society. So they take those two things and they put them together into one article. So it's interesting that they do that. And, you know, at first glance, you can look at this and you can say, okay, well, I mean, I guess I can see how they're related. But I think as we go through this, you will learn a little bit more about why those two parts fall under this same first, most important prioritized article. So what we're really saying here is that human dignity is a theoretical principle, right? That's what we're stating. And that human rights is the practical application on a global level. So this is really reflecting a concern for the need to promote both the respect, two kinds of respect. So on the one hand, we're respecting the individual, right? There's an inherent self-worth of each individual, and we have to respect that. So you have to respect every single person who's here today. Each and every one of you is deserving of dignity and respect. But on the other hand, also, particularly when we're talking about medicine and bioethics, because we continue to develop technology that has the potential to really transform humankind as a species. So for example, CRISPR technology, right? So we need to really think about what that looks like down the line in terms of the integrity of humankind and what that looks like in terms of, are we respecting the integrity of humankind? If we talk about, you know, let's say artificial intelligence or cloning or things like that, are we respecting the dignity of humankind as a species? So we're talking about two separate things here. We're talking about the individual and we're talking about the species. So you can see, as we just went over, that the UDBHR places respect for human dignity first in the list of principles that should govern the biomedical field. And it's actually referenced as the central aim of the entire document. But there's one big problem here. And this problem is the same problem that you'll see with really any of these documents. Human dignity is always given a prime kind of spot in terms of like, yes, we need to respect human dignity. Human dignity is very important. But the UDBHR does not explicitly define human dignity or human rights. So it's one of the things like, if you go, right, and you talk to anybody, I don't really care if they're in the field of, you know, healthcare or not, and you say, you know, do you support human dignity or do you support human rights? I'm pretty sure they're going to say yes, right? Very few people are going to say, no, I am anti-human dignity or anti-human rights. But if you then actually kind of get into the nitty gritty of asking them, okay, but what does that mean? That's when you really start kind of having some issues. So the question then becomes, how do we define human dignity and human rights? So I put this to you with yet another fun word cloud. What is human dignity? I think you all know how to do this at this point, right? So go ahead. What is human dignity? Let's see what you got. Hopefully it's still working. Is it not working?
It is working, ma'am.
It does work if you type it in?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, it's just not showing up right now. Why isn't it showing up? Oh, there we go. Okay, good. Phew. See, this is what happens. You get all like, yes, I figured out technology, and then, all right. Self-respect. Individual human rights, values. Remember, if you put in a phrase, you have to put a dash in between. It's everything we're entitled to, conscience. This is great. I'm pretty sure you can answer more than once on this one. Ethics, what we're entitled to. There it is, basic human respect that an individual is entitled to. Well done. Well done on the dashes. Respect for self and a fellow human. Great. You guys are figuring this out. Human values, love, conscience, respecting entitled value. Excellent. This is excellent. Human value. So again, you'll notice the word that's the biggest here is respect, right? Then you see human is slightly smaller than that. So these are the words that you're repeating. These are the words that are repeating what you are. Excellent. This is fantastic. So you can see here the word that comes up the most is respect. And I think that says a lot. When I talk about this, I always say, it's the idea of respecting an individual for being who they are, right? The inherent dignity of a person has to be respected at all times. So throughout the course of history, there have been different definitions of human dignity. So first, we have the classical antiquity approach, which comes from Greek and Roman literature that says that human dignity is something rare and exceptional, and it's inherited or achieved according to personal merit. So that was really where they started. And it's kind of important to understand kind of the trajectory of these definitions, where they started from and where we end up today. So the next one is world religious traditions. And the definition of human dignity proposed by the world religious traditions is that all human beings are created in the image of God, and therefore all people have inherent dignity, and humankind as a species possesses a special place in the natural world because all human beings are created in the image of God. So that's an interesting one because it touches on both of those things that we talked about before. So human dignity as it pertains to the individual and human dignity as it pertains to the species. And then you have Kantian moral philosophy, which proposes that there's an intrinsic worth that belongs to all human beings and to no other beings in the natural world. And because of that, it demands equal respect for all persons and forbids the use of another person as a means to an end. So that basically says all people have to be treated as people. They cannot be treated as a means to an end. But there are some problems with these definitions and the reasons why they haven't really stuck as the definitions that we use. So the problem with classical antiquity, if you're talking about human dignity kind of as being something that's earned or inherited, so does a view of earned dignity mean that some people have more dignity than others, right? Does this then create hierarchies of dignity within humankind? Because as we just saw with the word cloud, if we're saying that dignity means that just by virtue of being human, everybody is entitled to be treated with dignity, the classical antiquity definition really doesn't agree with that. It's saying, if dignity is earned, so then not everybody would be entitled to the same amount. World religious traditions, I think, is probably the easiest one to understand what the issue is. First of all, atheism, right? If you don't believe in God, then that entire definition falls apart. And the second one is the religion versus science debate. So, I think if there's a whole kind of argument that you will find in academia for sure, that says there's no place for religion in pure scientific debate, right? Religion is religion, science is science, and the two should not meet. And there's a subjective interpretation of any type of religious text. And you can't use that as the foundation for decision-making when you're talking about something that's objective, like medicine or science. And then Kantian moral philosophy, I would tell you, honestly, the biggest issue, and I happen to like Kant, but the biggest issue with Kantian moral philosophy, honestly, is it's very complicated, right? And you really need an easy definition if you want to be able to build all these, practical, usable documents. Kant is not the way to go. I would say most philosophers probably are not the way to go, because philosophy by definition is a little bit complicated. But if dignity depends on the rational will, okay, do we then have to conclude that those human beings who do not yet have the power of rational autonomy, like babies, those who have lost the power of rational autonomy, so those suffering from dementia, or those who do not have the power of rational autonomy, those with mental impairment, do not possess inherent human dignity? So as you can see, each of these possesses a particular issue that's a really critical issue that means that we really can't use it as the definition of human dignity, particularly when human dignity is serving as the foundation of every single document that we want to be using. So where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us with contemporary international humanitarian law. This is the definition that we go with for the most part. And what's interesting is, if you look at the Holocaust, there's a famous quote, and I'm paraphrasing, it's not actually the quote, but it says something along the lines of that human dignity, human rights, and international humanitarian law were all kind of born out of the ashes of the Holocaust. And so to me, it kind of makes sense that this is the definition that we're going off of, which is here the idea that human dignity is strongly connected with human rights, right? You saw on the screen that I shared earlier, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was published in 1948, which obviously is very close to the end of World War II. Article 1, right? All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So like, we're not messing around here. They were born free and equal in dignity and rights. So it takes away the Kantian issue of babies not having rational will, right? No, all human beings, it does not matter where you came from, anything, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Hard stop, right? And then you see the European Convention on Human Rights in Biomedicine. The purpose of that document is to protect the dignity of identity and identity of all human beings, and guarantees everyone without discrimination respect for their integrity and other rights and fundamental freedoms with regard to the application of biology and medicine. So you can see, and this is just some examples, but you can see the implication is that human dignity is the basis for asserting certain rights, human rights. So again, you can think of human dignity as being the foundation of the pyramid. Everything else rests on this concept of human dignity, which is why it's so important that we get that definition right. Again, you could say, all right, well, I understand that, but like, we all agree that human dignity is important, right? We're all pro human dignity. So like, what's the big deal? But the problem is, and again, I go back to my original definition of myself as being an academic activist. Academics have a way of like, always questioning and kind of always wanting to kind of like, I would say they're like, right, I have two boys, one is 9 and one is 12. One of them is always kind of like bothering the other one just to see if he could get under his skin. That's kind of what academics do, right? Is like, well, yes, we're pro human dignity, but like, we don't really have a great definition. Like, can someone fix that? Can someone change that? Right? Like, so we're saying human dignity is a supreme value on which all human rights and dignities are said to depend. And that's great in theory. But the issue is, right, no one actually explicitly defines the meaning, the content, and the foundations. So you will have the annoying little brother, the annoying older brother who's like, wait a minute, right? No one's explaining this. You can't have human dignity as the foundation of every one of these documents without a solid definition. That's just the way academia works. I hate to say it, but it is. Hence my telling you I'm an academic activist. Because ultimately, right, to me, who cares? Let's just come up with something that's like good enough, right? Because it's about the purpose of use, right? And I think when you see here, if you look at the second box, affirmations of human dignity found within contemporary humanitarian law reflect a political consensus among groups that may have vastly different beliefs regarding the definition, genesis, and application of the term. So yes, the argument is human dignity is serving as this placeholder, right, for whatever it is about human beings that entitles them to basic human rights and freedoms. And we haven't adequately defined what that is. Okay, who cares, right? Because ultimately, if we're going to use human dignity as more than just this theory, right, as more than just this probably very wordy theory, again, academics have a way of doing that. And I will say I'm guilty of that. As you can hear, I talk a lot. We need some type of ethical standard for the treatment of human beings. We do, right? I don't think anybody can argue against that. That requires a conception of what human beings are and what they are entitled to as a result of being human. You have to understand that in relation to the purpose of use, right? It's all about the purpose of use. Why are we sitting here today doing this workshop? Why? Hopefully, so that you take something away that you can use. It's all about being able to use what you learn in a practical concept. So you have here these two quotes. The fact that the notion of human dignity is so broadly defined is exactly what makes it useful for the purpose of a public document, because it's a way to express moral agreement among those from diverse cultural, religious, and moral traditions who might differ about how best to explain why human beings deserve respect, but agree that they do deserve respect. Again, and I feel like I'm really slamming academia here, and I'm not necessarily meaning to do that, but if you put a group of academics from all over the world into a room and ask them to come up with a definition of human dignity, good luck, right? And in the meantime, we're dealing with, human dignity violations and human rights violations. So we're kind of wasting our time coming up with this definition, which, after we come up with a definition, we have to do the same thing to come up with a declaration. And then how do you implement, all of these things that we're coming up with? And in the meantime, the second quote, I think, is what actually matters, which is, after all, what mattered most after 1945 was not reaching agreement as to the theoretical foundations of human dignity, but ensuring as a practical matter, right, that the worst atrocities inflicted on large populations during the war, so concentration camps, mass murder, slave labor, would not be repeated. So in short, the inviolability of human dignity was enshrined in at least some of these documents, chiefly in order to prevent a second Holocaust. So going back to the original learning objectives, right? Why do we talk about the Holocaust when we talk about human dignity? Because that's really where it started. That's where people stood up and were like, wait a minute. We need to figure this out, practically speaking, because we are seeing that, we can sit here and argue about what the exact definition should be all day, but we have now witnessed what it looks like when people completely just negate the idea of human dignity and what it means for people to respect the human dignity of others. And particularly when it comes to medicine, again, the idea of systems of power and systems of power creating these hierarchies of human life and creating, kind of abusing their power with vulnerable populations. And this was so shocking to people. This was so abhorrent to people that they were like, we need to do something. We need to do it now. And I would say, to me, that's more of like this academic activist approach to it. And then you have the idea of human rights, right? So now you've got human dignity. We understand human dignity, again, as the foundation. Now we have human rights. So if we are respecting the human dignity of all individuals, that's great. But what does that actually look like, right? That looks like human rights in the practical sense. If human dignity is the theoretical foundation, human rights are the practical application. So guess what's coming? Yes, another word cloud. What are human rights? When you hear human rights, what does that mean to you? Please respond via website or text message. And remember to put a dash if you are using more than one word. Are we still having fun with this? I'm still having fun with this. I'm just saying. Yeah, super fun. Woo-hoo! That's what I was looking for. All right. Treating all humans as equals.
Should I give you my opinion about what is human rights?
Sure.
To me, human rights are privileges that are necessary for any human being to lead a healthy social life.
Excellent. Thank you. Standards, norms humans are entitled to. Treating all humans as equals. You can feel free also, if other people want to answer, out loud, that's fine as well. It's hard to do the, interactive workshop. Again, when we're not all together, I wish that we could be, but, maybe next year. Privileges a human being is entitled to. Standards, norms to protect them from various abuses. Excellent.
But the recent most example, during the pandemic, the government enforced vaccination and mask wearing mandatory for all the citizens without being questioned. So the human rights were clearly violated there.
Yes, excellent. Thank you for that. This one looks pretty. I like the way this one looks. It's very aesthetically pleasing, I think. Okay. All right, so we're going to go on to the next slide. So this is like the actual definition that they give. I think your definitions were excellent, but this is the definition that, the books give. Freedoms and other guarantees to which people as humans have as rights. So for example, life, liberty, security. Inalienable claims or entitlements against society held equally by all people simply because they are members of humankind. So you can see there the relationship between human rights and human dignity, right? And you can see how it kind of goes back and forth both ways. They both work off of each other. They're very interrelated and interconnected, which I think is important to understand. Okay, so now we come to the second part of the presentation. Remember, there were two parts to Article 3 of the UDBHR. First part we just touched on. The second part, the interest and welfare of the individual should have priority over the sole interest of science or society. So as we said before, at first glance, you kind of look at this and you say, all right, I guess I agree with both of those statements, but it kind of seems a little odd, perhaps, that they put both of those together. So now we've gone through human dignity. We've gone through the definitions of human dignity. You can kind of understand why human dignity and the definitions of human dignity evolved the way in which they did, why human dignity became kind of such a big deal at the time it became such a big deal. So now we need to learn a little bit about what actually happened during the Holocaust. So first, let me just tell you, I'm Jewish. I was raised in a fairly religious household where we learned about the Holocaust. I learned about the Holocaust, in school. I never knew any of this until I started my doctoral program. And I was actually, when I was doing my doctoral program, my doctoral dissertation is on the transformation of psychiatry. My doctorate's in medical humanities. And my doctoral dissertation was on the transformation of psychiatry from its early roots kind of as this more humanistic field to its currently accepted status as a subspecialty of medicine. And the argument that I made was it would kind of, there was this idea of medicalization that took place within psychiatry in order to kind of mimic physical medicine. And that I think we're doing a disservice by not kind of going back to those roots of being able to pull from the humanities, because the medicalization ultimately leads to labeling, leads to some things that can be do more harm than good. So as I'm doing this, as I'm taking some courses and I'm learning some things, I'm learning about the way in which medicalization has been used negatively over the course of history. And I'm learning about, medicalization of race. And I start learning about what took place in Nazi Germany. And it is at this point that I realize exactly how the Holocaust took place and exactly what happened that allowed for the Holocaust to be the only example of medically sanctioned genocide. So I always say this, all instances of genocide are bad, right? They're all wrong. They're all bad. And I certainly am not trying to say that one genocide is worse than another genocide. But there's a reason why we need to talk about the Holocaust when we're talking about this particular topic. And that is because it is the only example of medically sanctioned genocide. And so what it represents, again, is the way in which the blatant disregard for human dignity on the part of people who are granted power over vulnerable populations can be very dangerous to society. So when you think about this big question, you think about, well, how could those who took an oath to heal transform into killers? And what are the implications of this systematic participation of medicine for current society? There's a lot of people who assume that, this was an example of medicine gone mad, right? There's a few bad apples, who kind of came in, or people were coerced. And so those are myths, and they're dangerous myths, because really what happened was the Holocaust took place with the active participation, willing participation of science and medicine as professions. Okay, that's really important to understand. There was a shift in medical ethics from caring for the individual to caring for society. That shift in medical ethics, because Germany at the time was leading the world, okay, in, I would say, academics, probably all academics, but definitely when it comes to, medical education. So we sit here and we think to ourselves, well, that there was no medical ethics, that's not medical ethics. What they did was not ethical. But actually, when we think about it, we're going to talk about this in a second, it was ethical. It just wasn't ethics in the way that we view ethics. And part of that was, again, the shift in medical ethics that went from caring for the individual to caring for society. And the idea that subverted individual rights in favor of societal progress, which again, you're hearing the same words as you were hearing in that second part of Article 3 of the UDBHR. So you had this scientific or medical ideal of using genetics to better society. And then the goal being to use science and medicine, this being the goal of the Nazis, the National Socialist Party, to use science and medicine to gain total control of the biological process of evolution to ensure the health and strength of the German nation. So you're talking about not only a lack of respect for the individual, the dignity of the individual, but you're talking about, again, a lack of respect for humankind, because we're talking about doing whatever we can to ensure that humankind as a whole, we can change the outcome of humankind as a whole. And physicians were instrumental, right? They led the way in instituting a system of identifying, labeling, notifying, transporting, persecuting, and murdering millions of people. So literally every step of the way, physicians were actively participating in this process. That is really important to understand. So where did this start, right? It started with the idea of eugenics. Eugenics was introduced and rapidly popularized internationally as a method of social reform after World War I. So you can see this very famous photo here, which says, eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution. So at the time, eugenics was kind of hailed as this scientific way to reform society. So we're kind of combining these two ideas of using science to create a better society, right? Using science and medicine to create a better society. Eugenics became the scientific justification, the scientific theory that justified whatever we need to do to kind of rid society of the unfit, right? Rid society of the people that were bringing it down, okay? So the United States were leaders in the field. The United States were leading the way when it comes to particularly involuntary sterilization. So the first involuntary sterilization law in the world was passed in the United States in Indiana in 1907. The United States continued to involuntarily sterilize people. I'll ask you a question and you can answer in the chat. At what point do you think the last recorded instance of involuntary sterilization in the United States took place? What year? You can answer in the chat. Just take a guess, it's fine. Gotta have some takers, come on. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Ayush, did you know that? How are you secretly like teaching this? Okay.
I researched a little bit about the seminar before I joined.
All right. Well done. On the one hand, well done. On the other hand, I feel like you should have put an asterisk next to that and been like, that I think yesterday. Gender, I think yesterday. Okay. I'm not gonna lie. Ayush nailed it. It was 1981. This makes it less fun for me because usually people are like 1960. I'm like, no, it's 1981. But he nailed it. It was 1981. However, that being said, we actually have a good point here. Dr. Reddy has a good point. Really, we are still dealing with this here in the United States, although it was not like technically recorded on law as like legally recorded as involuntary sterilization. California prisons continue to involuntarily sterilize inmates through 2010. And, we have reports of immigrants at the borders who are held in detention centers who are being involuntarily sterilized last year. So and again, of course, I'm sure that it is happening and we just don't know about it. So it's very easy, obviously, for everybody to be like, oh, Nazis are the worst. And, don't get me wrong. Obviously, Nazis are bad. Not trying to say that they're not. But guess what? They took a lot of stuff from the United States. Okay. Now, where they broke off was when the Nazis started saying, we're going to go one step further, right? We're going to go one step past involuntarily sterilizing people. And we're going to start killing people. We're going to start. So in the United States, the involuntary sterilization idea was to stop the reproduction of people who were degenerates, right? And these people who were degenerates, they were considered to be either of loose morals, which I happen to think is a fantastic term, by the way, loose morals, or people who had some type of mental illness, alcoholics, degenerates, anybody who was really seen as being kind of like, trying to think of the best way to phrase it, feeble-minded, things like that, right? But that was it. That was where the United States stopped. Not that there weren't proponents of going further than that, but for the most part, that was where the United States stopped. Germany took it further, and that's really because Germany had this leader, right? This charismatic leader who came along and was like, no, I've got a better idea, okay? So what Germany did was the idea of racial hygiene, Rassenhygiene. So Germany defined their nation as the Volk, right? The Volk was considered a living, breathing organism with its own health and hygiene. So let's say you don't feel well, right? You go to the doctor and you say, hey, I'm a living, breathing organism, and the doctor cares for your health and hygiene. But in Germany, at this point, medical ethics changes, right? The idea of medicine's responsibility changes. And no longer does medicine care about you as a living, breathing organism and your own health and hygiene. They care about the Volk, the nation, the strength of the nation, the future of the nation. So you see the degeneration of Germany. You see a declining birth rate among the better, more fit and productive class. That happens after World War I. And you see an increasing birth rate among the physically and or mentally unfit. That's where it starts. And this is really important to understand. It does not start with the Jews. It starts with the mentally and physically unfit. That's where it starts. Why? Because they were a burden to society. this is where the propaganda machine comes in. This is where it comes in. They're teaching this in high school, in elementary schools, primary schools, high schools, secondary schools. They're teaching this in textbooks that says, these people are costing you money. These people are costing you every day. They're taking up beds. We don't have enough beds for our soldiers who came back after World War I, who risked their lives. They can't work, okay? So they are lives unworthy of living, all right? So they're not productive members of society because they cannot benefit the Volk. So therefore, the idea of caring for the individual, the most vulnerable among us, no, we're not going to do that anymore because they do not benefit society. We have to think about societal progress. We have to think about the strength of the nation. We have to care for society. And that shift right there, that shift is really what allowed this example of medically sanctioned genocide to happen. And Hitler turns to the doctors and Hitler says, you National Socialist doctors, without you, we are lost. We cannot do this without you, not for a single day, not for a single second. Again, that's a famous quote that I'm paraphrasing or butchering, depending on what you want to say. But doctors joined the Nazi Party quicker and in greater numbers than any other profession. They are made to feel that they hold a special place and that only they can save the world. So you have this politicization of science and medicine, right? And the idea of National Socialism as applied biology, right? Everything, all behavior, positive and negative, gets attributed to genes. And science and medicine are the only people that can, as I said, save society. And you see this quote on the bottom, this famous quote that says, the individual personality cannot be the final goal of ethics. The people, the Volk as an organism, is the goal of our ethics. So it's not that there wasn't an ethics. It's not that there was no medical ethics. It's that this was the medical ethics that was being taught. And along with this really unbelievable propaganda machine, this is what was being kind of sold to the public. So that's how you get neighbor to turn against neighbor, right? That's how this happens, right? Because people trust science, right? People trust science. They trust medicine. There's this idea, and particularly at that point, this very like paternalistic idea. You go to the doctor tells you what's wrong. You do what the doctor tells you. You don't question it. This was before, you can go on WebMD and be like, well, WebMD says I have this, this, and this, right? No, the doctor says this is what it is. This is what it is. Now you have not just a doctor, but you also have the leaders of politics telling you, this is how we're going to fix our country. This is how we're going to return to greatness. It's a pretty strong argument. And eventually that argument goes over, right? And eventually the physicians, who were the same people who, put forth these, eugenic theory, they were the same people who, they provided the scientific justification for public policy measures. They enforced public policies through hereditary health course. They decided then, when they first moved over into this idea of euthanasia, right? They decided which children would live or die based on nothing but a questionnaire. They then injected lethal doses of medication into handicapped children and adults. They falsified death certificates. So they sent to the family, when a child died, they sent to the family, your daughter died of a ruptured appendix. And the family gets this and says, my daughter's appendix was removed. Then they take all this, right? And they move it over. They just move it over. They move over. They figured out this is the way that we kill as many people as possible. This is how we do it. So they just move it over. And the people who are running these euthanasia centers, the people who are running the psychiatric extermination centers, they move over the personnel, they move over the equipment, they just take it and they do it on a larger level. And now they expand it. And now anyone who is not considered racially fit, right? So now you start bringing in the Jews. Now you start bringing in the Romas. Now you start bringing in homosexuals. Now you start bringing in people who disagree politically. Now here's where you bring in everybody, right? Anybody who politically, because you've already set the stage for this. So now you bring anybody who politically has seen as unfit. Now you have the physicians on the ramps in the concentration camps selecting who would be sent to an immediate death and who would be forced into labor on the ramps of the concentration camps. Because there's a medicalized aspect to that. Rather than just having some random guy do it, you have a doctor doing it, right? And if a doctor does it, it's medical. performing torturous medical experiments in the name of scientific progress, right? So these experiments were not ethical by any stretch of the imagination. There was no regard for human life. But the argument was, but we're going to help German society. We're doing this to help the German military, right? And operating the gas chambers that killed millions of innocent victims. So when you go back and you think about that second part of Article 3, you can see we cannot put society ahead of individuals. This is why. This is the reason why those two are connected. So you have the doctor's trial at Nuremberg, which FYI, the 75th anniversary of the doctor's trial is coming up on December 9th. We're actually running a webinar. I can send you information about that as soon as I have the flyer finalized, which should be on Monday. You have Andrew Ivy, who is a doctor. He's testifying for the Americans for the prosecution in the doctor's trial. He says, had the profession taken a strong stand against the mass killing of sick Germans before the war, it is conceivable that the entire idea and technique of death factories for genocide would not have materialized. So what does that mean? That implies an inherent ethical responsibility on the part of the profession. The profession should have stood up. The profession should have said no. The profession should have said, this is not ethical. This is not, we took an oath, right? This is not the Hippocratic Oath. And there have been interviews with doctors that said that they believe that their oath to the Nazi Party was more important than the Hippocratic Oath. So their duty to the National Socialist Party was more important than their duty to their profession. That's a big deal, right? The fact that they were able to kind of like manipulate their moral compass, like that outside forces were able to manipulate their moral compass, is kind of what allowed all of this to happen, right? So it started again with the idea of killing the sick and the vulnerable. Like, ethically speaking, that can't be right. Ethically speaking, an entire profession that goes along with that, that can't be right. And then that leads to the birth of modern bioethics and the creation of the Nuremberg Code. And it is not until many, many years later, where at the Nuremberg Declaration, the German Medical Association, they finally issue an apology. And this important sentence here that says, these human rights violations perpetrated in the name of medicine under the Nazi regime continue to have repercussions to this day and raise questions concerning the way in which physicians perceive themselves, their professional behavior, and medical ethics, right? Because this stuff still matters, right? It still matters because we're still seeing these types of things. We talk about implications. Again, why does this matter to you? Yes, it's very interesting, and it's an important piece kind of history. But if you remember at the beginning, I said, it's not just part of history, it's part of our present and it's part of our future. So just because we can, does that mean we should, right? They too is I've always liked this quote. They too ask and answer the question, who shall live and who shall die, and who belongs to the community entitled to our protection? Then and now the subject at hand is killing and letting die and helping to die and using the dead. Then and now the goal is to produce healthier human beings and perhaps a better quality of human being. As I said, technology, right? In the past decade, if you think about how much we have the ability to do, we can manipulate genetics at the beginning of life, right? We can extend a patient's life, but we can extend the quantity of years, but can we extend the quality of years, right? That's just at the beginning and end of the lifespan. That's not talking about all the different things that we can do in the middle, right? There's so much there that technology gives us the ability to do, but like, does that mean that we should do it? What does it mean when we're talking about the human dignity of the person, and where are those conversations taking place, right? Who is deciding who is fit and who isn't fit? Because we're still creating hierarchies of human life. We continue to do that, right? We continue, even when you talk about equity, access to care, even if you're talking about the vaccine, right? Right now, in America, we have a crisis of the unvaccinated. We throw away thousands of doses of the vaccine because we have it, but we don't have the people who want to take it. Elsewhere in the world, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, people can't access the vaccine. So who's making those decisions? Who's getting discriminated against based on what? Gender, race, religion, socioeconomic status, location, right? There's a difference between what's ethical and what's possible or legal. Because in Nazi Germany, everything these doctors did was legal. Under Nazi law, under the Nazi regime, it was legal. But as you just saw, does that mean that it was ethical? So ultimately, where's that moral ethos that's telling us that above all, we need to respect and protect the individual, right? So are we any better off today? We are still dealing with all of these things, right? Again, there's access to basic healthcare, the right of the patient to make autonomous decisions, mental health care, structural and institutional racism, unethical human subject experimentation, equity of care, regulation of rapidly advancing medical technology, and medical genetics or end-of-life care. And all of these things, again, continue to create hierarchies of human life. They continue to create vulnerable populations that are marginalized, that don't receive the same quality or caliber of care. So my question to you here is, of all those things that I just listed, what do you see as being the biggest challenge we are currently facing? So for this one, the letter next to it is the one that you would type in. So we can just see, just to get a sense of kind of what you think the issues that we're dealing with right now are. And you can see there's an other at the bottom, which I hate other because I feel like I want to know what the other is, but you know, again, this is the first time I'm using this. So bear with me. Maybe next time I'll be able to figure out like other and then type in what it is. But there's obviously more than this, you know, but the point is there are a lot of, so I think this one, you can only respond online for some reason. There was one of them that did not give the text option. Again, this is my first time using this, so you got to bear with me. But I think here, what we're seeing is, again, there are so many issues, right? There's so many ethical issues. Wow, cool. So the regulation of rapidly advancing medical technology, unethical human subject experimentation, other, right of the patient to make autonomous decisions, medical genetics, end-of-life care, equity of care, structural and institutional racism, access to basic health. Oh, wait, I should have waited. I should have known that was going to happen. Okay. This is so cool. It should tell me like, now we're done. It should lock in. All right. Just, yeah, so you could see, right? Again, and I tend to, you know, share similar concerns with you, particularly kind of coming off of this lecture, right? Medical technology is going to continue to advance, and you know, you have kind of, I think, a bunch of people, you know, who are, it's not all bad, right? Obviously, like, listen, if we can cure cancer, that's fantastic, but like at what price, I think, and where are the people that are kind of arguing for human dignity and the idea that someone has to be paying attention to what this means. And I think that technology progresses faster than like the human ethical side can kind of keep up with things. So I like this one. I like this chart aspect of it. All right, so why do we need to talk about it right now, right? Why? I mean, it's always important, don't get me wrong, but why do we need to be talking about this right now? So,
excuse me, Dr. Stacy.
Yes.
I have a question. The answers of the polls which were answered, whether they were answered in context to globe, to the whole earth as a problem, or with only respect to the countries?
I think it's global.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So there's a very famous quote by a scholar named Robert Proctor, and he says, in times of war or economic crisis, things can happen that otherwise in times of peace or economic stability would never be tolerated, right? So when Hitler signed his order where he said he allowed for euthanasia, which is actually one of the only ones that he put in writing, he backdated it to coincide with the start of the war because he knew that he'd be able to kind of slide that one in there easier if, you know, he was doing it in wartime. So the National Socialist policy obviously is able to use times of war as an excuse to shift these traditional medical paradigms. And we've seen that the transformation of the medical ethos led to, among other things, a healthcare system that ministered to the strong instead of caring for the sick or vulnerable. And a hierarchy of human life then resulted in which people were labeled, persecuted, and eventually murdered based on their perceived fitness and worth to society. Okay, so we've got that. So what we see here is that when we're in a crisis, right, bad stuff can happen. Now, very important to point this out. Very, very important. If you listen to nothing else, listen to this, because I don't want you to misconstrue what I'm saying here. The Holocaust didn't need to happen. There was no shortage of medical supplies. There was no, virus that came out of nowhere that nobody could control. There was no, that was a global pandemic. The Holocaust happened because of decisions that were made, because of, one step at a time, because people made choices to do certain things and to take certain actions. COVID-19 is different, okay? COVID-19 is a global pandemic that resulted in our need to allocate scarce resources globally. It's different. The two things are different, okay? The other thing I want to say is there are a lot of people that would make the argument that the Holocaust should stand alone. And it was so heinous. It was so brutal. It was so horrible that it should never be used, because to do so kind of demeans its place, I guess, like as being the epitome of evil. But I think that we have to use those lessons. I think that the only way we can actually honor, the people who died, the legacy of those who died, is to use those stories. And if we don't learn from history, then, we're doomed to repeat it, right? So we see sometimes the Nazi analogy being overused. We see, people disagree and then they call each other Nazis or something like that. There is a way to do it that is respectful. But I do think that there are certain lessons that we have to take from this. So that being said, when we talk about COVID-19, yes.
Winston Churchill also made a quote which goes in line with what he said: never let a crisis go to waste.
Yes, absolutely. Right. And I think, even now when we're talking about COVID-19, what are we going to learn from COVID-19? Right.
All the flaws which it made obvious, that we lack primary healthcare centers, there's not enough ventilation or oxygen tanks, everything else, like there's not enough emphasis on primary healthcare, rather it's being more focused at secondary and tertiary, at least in my country.
Yeah. And I think, we have to learn from this, because again, if we don't learn from it, then I think, the next time something happened, those are needless deaths, because we could have learned, we could have taken away lessons, right? So COVID-19 debates, we're talking about the allocation of scarce resources, who should be favored if there aren't enough life-sustaining supplies for everyone. So we have age being used. The first thing that happens, right, the first really big place that this crisis hits is in Italy. And we have the Society for Anesthesiologists in Italy coming out with a statement that uses age as an exclusionary criterion and says, if you are over the age of 65, we can't admit you to the ICU. We don't have enough beds. And that is the criteria that we're using. It turns out Italy has a very high percentage of people over the age of 65. And this then provides a subtle message about the way in which society devalues the elderly population. They don't use anything else at this point. They just said, if you're over the age of 65, that's it. So they basically, at that point, they're, leaving an entire group of people to die based on their age. Okay. Now you have instrumental value to society. You have giving frontline healthcare workers priority, which has been a consideration. But that creates a hierarchy of worth to society based on profession, right? So there are other frontline workers as well. Are they getting the same type of treatment? Are they getting the same access to PPE or the vaccine or whatever it is? So for example, people that work in a grocery store who, are going to work because they have to go to work. They don't have an option to not go to work. They have to take public transportation. They are coming back. They don't have the option of kind of sequestering away from their family because they don't have a house that, has multiple rooms. They're living perhaps in an apartment building where they're then exposing other people to COVID-19, but they're not giving the same. Hold on one second. They're not given the same PPE or the same access to things as someone who works in a hospital and perhaps comes from a higher socioeconomic group and is can come home and can separate from their family or can make a decision as to whether or not they want to go to work because it's more of a need in one as opposed to having the ability to choose in the other.
So she has a history of discharging. Praise God.
What? I'm sorry? Nope. Okay. So the next one is comorbidities such as diabetes and heart disease. So here in the United States, the African-American population has a disproportionate percentage of diabetes and heart disease cases, and those outcomes are directly affected by equity and access to care. So these are conditions that if people had been given access to long-term health care, perhaps could have been under control. But we've seen in the US that because over time, we have not done the greatest job giving all people access to the same type of preventative care. That is an issue that we had before this. Now, we're not going to solve it in the middle of a pandemic, but using that as exclusionary criteria in the middle of a global pandemic, again, that means that we're putting out a subtle message that there are certain people that we're going to treat differently than other people. And, perhaps we're taking certain things into account, or we're factoring in certain things that aren't, that have this kind of institutional structural racism underlying them. The Office of Civil Rights here within the United States Department of Health and Human Services had to issue a bulletin very early on, I think it was in beginning of April, after two states, Alabama and Pennsylvania, were found to have intellectual disabilities among the criteria for allocation of resources. Now, these intellectual disabilities did not have anything to do with a person's like predicted their outcomes. So it's not like it's not like, oh, well, if you have cerebral palsy, chances are you're going to you have a higher chance of dying from COVID-19. But it actually said in the Alabama and Pennsylvania, in their allocation of resources, these people should not be given a ventilator if it comes down to making a decision between people. So this is troubling, right? We need guidelines it's an unprecedented crisis, right? So we need guidelines, there's no question. And the motivations are not the same as in Nazi Germany. I'm not questioning that either, right? I'm not saying that what's happening here is an attempt to, systematically rid ourselves of certain segments of the population. But first of all, it's not like we had plenty of time, right? Like here in the US, after September 11th, we had this whole thing with disaster protocols and trying to come up with these crisis standards of care. What if this happens? What if it happens on a larger scale? We didn't do anything, right? We didn't prepare ahead of time. So then all of a sudden, everybody's kind of, oh, what do I do? What do I do? Well, the idea of kind of having conversations like this and kind of preparing ahead of time, I don't know, perhaps this is something that we need to discuss more often and needs to be worked into these conversations, not just with healthcare professionals, but also with policymakers. And the idea that during these crises, we're kind of all of a sudden adopting this system of catastrophe ethics. We saw that happen in Nazi Germany, right? This shift, this transformation of ethics, that's what allowed bad things to happen. So we have to maintain this moral ethos and not all of a sudden throw it out the window and be guided by this new system of catastrophe ethics. The idea of a hierarchy of human life, this person is, worth more to society than this person, or this person's life should be valued more than this person, remains troubling, as does the idea that healthcare providers, during, at least at the beginning of the pandemic, were the ones saying, well, what am I supposed to do? I have a patient here, but I also have to think about, the good of society and the good of the individual. That is a huge burden to place on healthcare providers. And we have to think about that too, and how that affected healthcare providers and how that will continue to affect them. And the resources that we owe these people who we put in this position, because we really didn't do a good enough job preparing for that. So I hit you with a lot of information. So now, what do you do, right? What do you do with this information? How do you start kind of using this information in your daily lives, right? So a big part of what we talked about here is the idea of medicalization and dehumanization. So you can enhance the doctor-patient relationship by reminding healthcare professionals that each patient is a human being, right? They're not a diagnosis, they're not a case, they're not a room number, they're not a disease, they're a person, right? And so each person deserves to be treated with respect and care, regardless of his or her gender, race, religion, socioeconomic status, right? This has to be at the heart of medicine and health, okay? Because dehumanization is what allowed physicians to abandon their oath to respect the human dignity of all patients during World War II. So what we need to do is we need to rehumanize medicine. We need to inject that humanity back into medicine. This idea of the paternalistic relationship where, again, the doctor says, this is your diagnosis, this is the treatment plan, does not result in, in a good relationship between the patient and the physician. It doesn't result in good treatment outcomes. So we need to work on that. And we need to work on, again, I think at the heart of that, the idea of this respect for human dignity. Okay? We need to learn from history. And perhaps more importantly, we can't be indifferent to what's happening today. When we see something wrong, we have to stand up and we have to say something. We have to make sure that we're not turning a blind eye. Respect for the individual should always be given priority over societal or technological progress. The field of medicine and those who practice it have a tremendous amount of power. And with that power comes a tremendous amount of responsibility. We have to always remember that fact. This next one is something I'm going to tell you, but I tell my children as well. It's something that I believe is universal. We're all members of humankind, entitled to be treated with dignity and respect. But that also means that we have a responsibility to treat others with dignity and respect. And talking about the Holocaust, using the Holocaust as a historical framework for kind of understanding this and seeing what can happen when we don't kind of do these things that we're talking about is really important. Holocaust education can't be relegated to just like, oh, a piece of history, or oh, a piece of Jewish history, German history, medical history. It has to transcend boundaries, right? It has to be international, interfaith, intergenerational, and interprofessional, because it's the history of humankind, but it's also the future of humankind. So I have a nonprofit organization called the Maimonides Institute for Medicine, Ethics, and the Holocaust. You can see over there, that's our website. And our motto is remember the past, protect the future, act now. Because we can all be doing something, right? Each and every one of us can do something. It doesn't matter what that is, but we can and should. We have a responsibility, right, to kind of make the world a better place by doing something. So I think, that's kind of, I think the takeaway from this is to do something. But we have to finish with one more fun poll. So I would like to know, and this can be, you can type this in, but we can also talk about it at this point. What is one thing that you learned today that you will take with you as you go out? And when I say take with you, whether that's in school, in practice, or whether that's honestly just in life, what is one thing that you learned from today, from our conversation today, that you will take with you?
May I speak?
Of course.
What I learned is that people try to not talk about situations which were tragedies or which cause them a lot of grief, which are poignant, but we should rather, on the contrary, we should talk more about them so that they don't happen in the near future. Like Holocaust, for example.
Thank you very much. I agree. And I also think, it's very hard. A lot of times, I having a conversation with practicing physicians, nobody likes to hear about the negative things that happen. Nobody kind of likes to be called out or criticized, but it's part of who we are. It's how we got here. It's part of, we have to acknowledge it. We have to own it. And we have to promise to do better, I think. To me, I think if we don't do that, we're doing a disservice to ourselves. And we're doing a disservice to the people who came before us, and we're doing a disservice to the people who will come after us.
Yes, I agree. The situations like this, the tragedies, the crises, it brings out the real qualities in people, which they value the most. Like it brings out either the best or the worst in people. And
Absolutely.
the reason, and by avoiding them, it doesn't mean that these problems have stopped existing. It is still existing, but we are simply ignoring them.
Yes, exactly. I'd
also like to say that we as a society and as doctors or potential doctors should have a stronger resolve to work as doctors to steer the society in such a way that we do not fall into certain norms or norms that alienate societies, and in particular certain communities that feel like they may have a disadvantage in like compared to other communities, I'd say in general.
Yeah, I
I'd
agree.
say, yeah, sorry, go on.
Continue. I'm sorry, continue.
Just wanted to say that I feel like a lot of communities feel like they may have a disadvantage, and us as a society should make sure that they do not feel that way, and we make sure that they do not also not get involved in any sort of disadvantage, and make sure that there's an equality between every single community out there, and they have all these same opportunities and chances to approach healthcare and things in general, I'd say.
So I completely agree with that. First of all, extra credit to you because you did prior research and were able to answer the trick question that I threw out there. But the second thing is, I think that one thing that people don't understand as much as I think they should, and it's not always stressed as much as, is the responsibility of physicians to be leaders, right? And so when we talk about the systems of power, when we talk about how the systems of power can be used negatively, we also have to understand how the systems of power can be used positively. And the responsibility that people within the systems of power have to be leaders and agents of social change, right? And so I think that that's something really important. I have noticed that nobody has responded to my question here, but if there is one thing that I hope that you took away from this, it is that you have an opportunity. Thank you, someone. It is the fact that you have an opportunity to really make a huge difference, right? And a huge difference. Remember at the beginning, we talked about there being two different levels, right? There's the individual level. And of course, you have the opportunity and the ability to make a huge difference individually in the lives of each and every patient that you encounter. But you also have the ability on a macro level to make change there as well. And so I think the idea of being an advocate, of being a change maker, of being a leader, of being an activist is something that we need to talk about more as well. And I think that that's something that we also learned from COVID-19. The idea of kind of people that we need to see people who are kind of willing and able and have the desire to make a difference on all of these different levels. That's what we need. And so when I say like everyone can do something, everyone can do something, and everyone can do different things. And that's kind of the beauty of humankind and what makes us all different, what makes us all unique. So I think to me, like that's a big takeaway when I talk to the next generation. Is always like it's my responsibility to help you reach that point. It's my responsibility to help mentor you so that you can reach that, whatever potential you want, and kind of help you all get to that point. So I appreciate that somebody learned something. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to, if anyone has any questions, you can feel free at this point. You can put your video on if you feel comfortable with it. You can ask questions, speak freely, and interact. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? No. Just kidding. Okay, so if anyone has questions, the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to type in, this is my organization. We have a lot of resources. We have videos, we have webinars. If you're interested in learning more about this. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type in my email address. I genuinely mean this. And if you don't believe me, ask Shubham. If anybody is interested in learning more, if anybody has any questions, wants more resources, anything, please feel free to contact me. As I said, it's our responsibility. Go ahead. Someone have? Nope. Okay. It's our responsibility. We have this saying in Judaism, it's called Lador Vador, and it means from generation to generation, right? And it's our responsibility. When I talk about the Holocaust, I feel it's my responsibility to pass down the stories of the generation before me that was silenced, but it's then on me to kind of help amplify the voices of the next generation. And help you all, again, to develop into, the leaders that you're going to be. I take that responsibility very seriously on both ends. So if you have any questions, if you want more information, again, please feel free on. I'm not just saying that. So send me an email and let me know if there's any way that I can help you. But I'm here. Questions, concerns, comments. I think we have 66 participants now. I'm not sure how that happened, but I'm thrilled. Great. Excellent. What do we got?
I have a question.
Yes.
I believe that the reason why Hitler wanted all the Jewish people to die was because simply he saw them as an inferior race. There was no real motive or some intellectual thought or process put into it. He was simply racist and he simply saw them as an inferior race. So throughout the workshop, we were tackling questions which he used to manipulate the medical officers, but I believe that those questions were simply a superficial way to put up a front so that he could manipulate. The real reason wasn't related to that. So why did you focus on that rather than the original cause of it?
On the anti-Semitism? Is that what you're saying? Why didn't I focus on the anti-Semitism?
No, I'm confused. As in, I don't believe that the reasons which he stated were the real reasons to him. Those questions were simply put as to manipulate the people, the healthcare workers, and everybody involved in the process. So should we?
I think he very strongly.
I think that. So I definitely think. Look, I definitely think that he had one kind of goal of annihilating the Jewish people. There was one goal of the final solution, and he wanted to rid the world of the Jews. But you can't just come in and say, let's kill. I mean, you can, but I don't know how successful you are with kind of let's kill all of these people. But I think the most important thing to understand is that wasn't his only goal. He had other goals as well. And so I think when people think of the Holocaust, they think of the idea of Hitler killing 6 million Jews and the idea of the final solution being what was discussed at the Wannsee conference, which was ridding the world of Jews. It wasn't just about that to Hitler, though. It was also about this idea of promoting the Aryan race, promoting this idea of the pure Aryan race, which was devoid of the mentally unfit, the physically unfit. And that's why those were the first people that were targeted. So I think that is an unknown part of this history that I think people really need to understand. I don't know how much he would have been able to get people, particularly maybe physicians, definitely not physicians and scientists, because there were a large population of Jewish physicians and scientists on board if he had started out just by saying, we're going to kill all of the Jews. I think that it was done, again, very systematically and using science and medicine, the idea of eugenics as kind of this foundation is what allowed him to transition from this first, I would say, kind of like two sections, right? From this first idea of killing of the unfit to then moving forward to this concept of, well, now we're going to expand it. And now we're going to go full on extermination centers where we're just going to kill all the Jews. It doesn't matter if they're quote unquote fit or not. By definition, they are Jews. So we are going to kill them.
Okay, so the unfit people who were initially killed were killed irrespective of their race, whether German or Jewish. They were just killed for being unfit or being old.
Right.
Okay, thank you for
Ayush, do you have a question? You can go ahead and ask it.
No, that was confirming whether that was what happened.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I wanted to say that the German doctors, they weren't really manipulated. They were just like incentivized, because imagine there's a political leader and he's saying that, oh, I'm gonna, like, you are powerful and I need you on my side and I'm gonna promote your because I noticed that a lot of doctors, most German doctors at that point of time, they were mostly just going on Hitler's side for career opportunities and just to grow their career and grow grow in power, in essence. So I feel like that's, as we've noticed, that's more of a reason why German doctors went on Hitler's side, and also to promote the genetic whole prospect of that. But it was more of an incentivized reason why they went on his side.
So that's an excellent point, right? And the other thing is, a lot of the positions, in kind of these academic centers and things like that were up to that point kind of taken up by Jewish doctors. Once legislation was passed that basically excluded Jews from any of these positions, that opened up a lot of spots for these younger people, these younger German doctors who now to take them over. So yes, there was definitely a lot of opportunism. And I think that that's something, you know, when we talk about this as well, you need to have a moral ethos that is at the heart of what it is that you do, that cannot be altered based on outside forces, whether those outside forces are economic incentives, career incentives, political incentives. And I think, you know, the idea also, then you see later on when we're talking about the medical experiments, there are experiments that never would have been given, you know, the green light to move forward in other times. But you had kind of all of these people who were not even considered to be people. These concentration camp prisoners were not even considered to be people. So some of these doctors who had kind of these crazy ideas of things they could do, like really crazy ideas of things you could do, like you would read in sci-fi novels, all of a sudden saying, hey, this is an opportunity to do something that might be wonderful for my career because I might be able to figure something out. And this is an opportunity that I'm never going to get again because, you know, no one cares. No one cares about these people. I have a group of people here. I can literally do whatever I want to these people and nobody cares. So yes, advancing their careers, moving forward. These were all really important reasons. And then when you have Hitler giving these speeches like he did, saying, you National Socialist doctors, I cannot do without you. Not for a single day, not for a single hour. If not for you, all is lost. You know, so I think, you know, that idea of kind of putting them on a pedestal, even more so than I think, you know, physicians are already kind of put on a pedestal. All of that played into kind of this idea as well. Good point.
Yes, I agree with everything that both of you said. And if I remember correctly, Hitler carefully avoided using terms like killing or terminating people. He used terms which were kind of vague and did not focus on the murderous intent of the actions which he committed.
Absolutely. That's another good point. So a lot of it was medicalized terminology, and a lot of it was like, these people, you know, we're going to save them by killing them, right? We're going to heal them by killing them. There was a lot of that because these people were lives unworthy of life. So we're actually almost doing them it's mercy killings. That's really where it came from, the idea of euthanasia. It was mercy killings. And it was kind of easy to sell the idea of mercy killings for people that were severely mentally handicapped, or, you know, that was the way that it was phrased at that time. So I think that that's, you know, important to understand as well. And again, anything kind of under the guise of medicine. Hitler was the great doctor of the German people. They were going to cure the nation. And you see language like, you know, I would cut off the body. I would cut off a gangrenous appendix to save a human life. The Jew is, you know, a cancerous tumor on the body of the Volk, things like that. So everything, all the terminology becomes medicalized. And all of that, again, is the danger of what can happen when you medicalize things and kind of when you use it for something in a negative way, as opposed to using it in a positive way. It goes back to the idea that, you know, there's great power in the field of medicine, and what happens, you know, it's something that has to be understood. So I don't know if you have this in your respective countries, but here in the US, we have something called the white coat ceremony. If you have, give me a thumbs up if you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, we do have.
Yeah. Okay. So it's this idea, you put that white coat on and you have this, you understand the gravitas of you know, who you are becoming and the responsibilities that you're undertaking, right? It is the only field where you literally hold life and death in your hands, you know? So that's why I feel like when you're educating, you know, physicians, it is a much, much greater responsibility than educating other professions, right? Because you really have to understand, you know, the enormity of what you are going to be tasked with. And so I think understanding things like this and understanding what happens if you don't fully grasp this concept and you don't fully grasp, you know, what it is to be sitting in your shoes is something that needs to be discussed just as much as kind of anatomy and things like that.
Yes. If we don't understand them properly, we risk the emergence of another Holocaust.
Yes, exactly.
And I think what Hitler did was involuntary euthanization.
I'm sorry, say that one more time. It's the banging here. I'm having a hard time.
What Hitler did was involuntary euthanization.
Yes, absolutely. And so, you know, obviously that has implications now for lots of things, because also, there are certain associations that people have with terminology. And there's also the idea of generational trauma, right? And you see generational trauma in a lot of groups that, have had things happen to them. A lot of minoritized groups that have had negative experiences with the medical profession. And it's also something that needs to be understood as well, because, you can walk into somebody's room, and let's say you're walking to the room of a Holocaust survivor, although, unfortunately, there's not that many Holocaust survivors left. But even if you're walking to the room of anybody who, comes from a minoritized group that has had negative experiences, doesn't trust the medical profession, when I say we need to rehumanize medicine, we need to rebuild the trust within the medical, between the medical profession and some of these vulnerable populations. So this plays into that as well.
Out of curiosity, how does the Holocaust experience in general affects the German doctors at this current point of time compared to in contrast to the other doctors of the rest of the countries? Like, is there anything special that it applies to? Like, for example, in Germany as a country, they try their best to make sure that the Holocaust is not denied or ignored in any way, and it's acknowledged, and they make sure that the events don't happen again, and they try to put themselves in a great international presence to make sure to do the same. So as a doctor in the medical community in Germany, how does it affect them in contrast to the other doctors in the rest of the communities?
Good question. So I can't speak obviously for the entire German medical profession, but so I did a program last year. It's called Medicine and Morality. It's on our website if you're interested in seeing it. And so we had a lot of international scholars. And one of the people that we had was a representative from the World Medical Association, who's also part of the German Medical Association. And he was no joke, man. He was like, yeah, we take this really seriously in Germany. Like, I think in Germany, they there's kind of no escaping the fact that, like, it's Germany, you can't really get away from that. And as I showed you in the presentation, the German Medical Association did ultimately issue an apology, which, I mean, it took a while, but, was a big deal. So my personal dealings, this is what I can tell you. I can speak personally. I can tell you that I do, work internationally. I can tell you that Germany, in my experience, I have found them to be better than some of the other countries that I've worked with in terms of like taking ownership for it. Because keep in mind, right, it's not just Germany, it's a lot of the occupied territories as well. And everybody that kind of, took part in this. And even, when I'm talking, look, I'm very honest about the fact that Germany looked to the United States. I live in the United States, right? Germany looked to the United States as like role models. So, even when you're talking about it, there's lots of people here in the United States that don't want to hear that, because it's a dark period in the history for really anyone in the medical community that took part in this in any way. So like you answered that question before, and you said 1981, but as I said, it's not like this isn't still taking place here. And when I start saying that in certain lectures in certain places, there are people that do not want to hear that. So I would say, Germany tends to be pretty good, because like, it's not like they're going to be like, nope, that didn't happen here. Like, there's really no way to kind of deny that. Whereas when I start moving more into like the contemporary context and talk about the fact that it's still happening in some of these other places, that's when it gets a little bit iffy depending on where I'm speaking at the time.
That's really fair. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
This is coming from someone who has a perspective in moving to Germany as a doctor, who wants to pursue medicine there, like work as a doctor there. So I wanted to be as much informed as possible about it.
Yeah, there's actually a colleague of mine who is German and found out, she's a radiologist, and she found out that her family, actually, they were Nazis. And she started speaking a lot. She started, doing a lot of lectures kind of about like what that's like for her. And she's fantastic. If you contact me, I'll try and put you in touch with her. I think she's still practicing in Germany. But her lectures are wonderful, I think, because, I think it's wonderful to hear kind of from all different types of people. And that's something that I feel very strongly about, is this idea of transcending boundaries, and the idea that, again, this is part of human history, and it's part of our present, and it's part of our future. So it's something that we all need to be talking about. So, one of the things that my organization does is we partnered with the Greek Orthodox Church, and I met the head of the Greek Orthodox Church, His All Holiness, the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. She got his blessing to run programs that work directly with the clergy to educate people. Because again, when you're talking about systems of power, and you're talking about kind of a moral ethos and developing this idea, of the inherent dignity of humankind, where do these values come from, right? Like where is all this kind of starting from? And I think one of the places that when you think of that, is clergy, right? A lot of these values kind of are developed there. So the idea is kind of, where can we be teaching this? Where can we kind of be, because it's something, I mean, yes, it holds special significance when you're talking to people who are going to be practicing medicine. But I think the topic in general is one of great importance, just in terms of how we treat each other as humans. So I think when we talk about that, and we talk about what are ways that we can kind of incorporate this into the larger conversation, so that really we just treat each other better, and we prevent some of the things that are happening, some of the human rights violations, some of the abuses of human dignity that are happening. How can we kind of work with other systems of power and with other influencers to make sure that we're getting this message out there? I think it's really important to reach out across these traditional boundaries and say, no, we have to find a way to communicate this to as many people as possible.
That's really informative. Thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure. Questions, comments? Anyone just want to be like, yes, super cool way that you integrated that, those polls. I'm not going to lie, guys. I'm the most impressed that I was able to figure that out, because technology is really not my strong suit. So the fact that I was able to figure that out is forget everything else. You were like, thank you. It was really cool. I said before that you're not supposed to use people as a means to an end, but you were a little bit my guinea pigs for that one, for trying that out. So thank you for unknowingly being part of my unethical experiment. I hope none of you have any, negative side effects. Delegates to the workshop.
Glad to be of service.
You are making the future of society better, even though I said you're not supposed to. Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments. I think you're all here past the time that you're supposed to be here. I'm more than happy to say and answer your questions. I'm always happy when I have people who are interested in the topic. But from my perspective, I believe you have fulfilled your workshop obligation. So you're more than welcome. You're more than welcome to go. But if there's anyone who wants to say and ask any additional questions, I am here. And if there's anyone, again, who wants to email me, please feel free to email me. As I said, I'm here for any questions, resources, anything. But I really appreciate you all being here and taking the time out of your busy days and your busy schedules to be part of this workshop. So thank you so much for that. I hope you all have a wonderful day, night, wherever you are in the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can't hear you.
I'm not actually saying anything anymore. I'm just I'm giving everyone permission to leave because I think we're done with the workshop, right? I think this is.
Yeah, Professor, I just thought that Mamta will be concluding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you're telling Mom that you couldn't hear her. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I would like to express my gratitude on the days of the workshop.
Mamta, sorry, your voice is breaking. I think, Professor, what she wants to say is to thank you for taking this wonderful workshop today. And I hope that all the participants, it's clearly evident because in India, it is around 9:15 p.m. in the night. And we are still seeing quite a lot of people join on this workshop. So I am pretty sure that they had some good time with you in this workshop and they learned something useful. Thank you, Professor, for taking out the time and making this workshop possible. So Professor will also be sending out the link for tomorrow's events to you. So depending on the time that you have, please join us. We'll have this conference go on for another 4 days. So whenever you are available, you are invited to join. We'll be sending out the links to you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, Dr. Schiff, for organizing this. It's wonderful what you're doing. I think it's great. It's an honor and a pleasure to be involved in this. And thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you all for staying up late to hang out with me.
Not a problem, Amit. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you. Thank you. I think, Piyush, we can close the session. Thank you all the delegates for joining in. Piyush, we can close the session. Thank you.
Right, sir.